Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Spinnaker Summit. This year, we'll be doing a virtual presentation. Manish and I will be talking about Spinnaker at Airbnb. You may remember me from 1 year ago, where we also talked about Spinnaker at Airbnb. So this year, we wanted to give all of you an update on how Airbnb is doing with Spinnaker and what Spinnaker means for us as an enterprise. So let us introduce ourselves. So I'm Jens. I'm originally from Belgium. I moved to the States in 2013, and I started my career as a front-end engineer and then slowly transitioned into infrastructure. I currently am a software engineer on the continuous delivery team, mostly working on running and platformizing Spinnaker at Airbnb. And I also have a role on the CI SIG. So that's a special interest group that I collaborate in with Netflix, and we mainly talk about integrating CI into Spinnaker. I'm going to let my colleague Manish introduce himself.
Great. Thanks, Jens. Hey, guys. So I'm Manish Maheshwari. I'm a product manager here within Airbnb. I own reliability products across Airbnb, including continuous delivery, specifically Spinnaker. And then previously I was at AWS, focusing on developer tools.
So let's talk a little bit about Spinnaker at Airbnb so far, for those of you who might have missed our presentation last year. So our story sort of starts with our in-house tool, Deployboards, which we initially built. So rather than adopting an existing solution, we sort of rolled our own tool. So what we ran into after a while was that Deployboard did not support deploy pipelines and orchestration of complex workflows. So while Deployboard was a good enough system to deploy a single service to a single environment, and that helped Airbnb scale, once we moved to a microservices architecture, Deployboard did not work as well for orchestrating complex workflows, basically deploy pipelines where we would like to deploy to different environments. Let's say that we wanted to deploy to staging, then Canary, then production. That's not something that was possible with Deployboard. So in 2019, we started looking at different solutions, and one of those solutions was Spinnaker. So we eventually ended up adopting Spinnaker, mostly because of its large open source community and also its built-in support for deploy pipelines as sort of a core concept. So in 2019, we started adopting Spinnaker, and now in 2020, we have made Spinnaker generally available to all of Airbnb engineering, and the majority of Airbnb services have adopted Spinnaker so far, and it has been a great success. So let's talk a little bit about what this presentation today is going to be about. So we'll start talking about Spinnaker general availability. So in 2020, we made Spinnaker general available to all of engineering at Airbnb. How do we do this? What do we learn from this process? We'll also talk about some changes that we've made to Airbnb. We've made a lot of UI and user experience changes. We will talk about how we improved and polished the Spinnaker user experience to better fit some of Airbnb's internal processes. And then we'll also talk about some other new features that we added. We've really extended Spinnaker sort of to our own liking, and we would like to talk about some of these use cases that we've run into and how we've adapted Spinnaker to work better for Airbnb. Okay, Manish.
Great. Thanks, Jan. So I'm going to focus on how did we make Spinnaker generally available and a few learnings from there. So starting with initial landscape that we had at Airbnb, our systems were like completely monolith, and our goal was to move from monolith to SOA or microservices starting in 2018, 2019 timeframe. And then we quickly realized that our existing deployment tooling, which was Deployboard that you had mentioned previously, was not a good fit here. A few reasons here, because a few reasons to that is, first one, the overall move from monolith to SOA has its own operational complexity, which is just because of distributed systems nature, and there's a lot more moving parts. And then second, as we move to SOA, we're also moving to moving towards like cloud native workloads in SOA. So we were using containers and Kubernetes, and then our existing tooling did not have like the first class support for that architecture. You can move to this next chart. Okay, so. So with the rapid increase in the overall number of services, there were a bunch of initiatives across the company that we had. One of the initiatives was to keep all code, all service related code or any config in one particular place, and we call it as one touch internally. So that this includes pipeline configuration or anything related to our service in one Git repository. And then, as I mentioned, as we move from monolith to microservices, more services, of course, leads to more deploys. And as a result, there was two things happening. One, there was a culture shift that had to happen, and second was to learn how do we deal with this operational complexity of this new SOA world. And as more services deployed, the changes. Those services did not have like any guardrails in place from deployment safety perspective, and that's where Spinnaker came in and really helped us improve the overall deployment story at Airbnb. So at the looking at the timeline, we as we transition from monolith to SOA, started transitioning from monolith to SOA when 2018 2019 time frame, and that is the time when we decided that we will move to Spinnaker after looking at other alternatives from feature perspective and cost as well, and we decided that we will look into move to Spinnaker, and we will fill the gap that needs to be addressed for Airbnb specific use cases. So in 2019, when we started the Spinnaker project, the key challenge there was how do we ensure that it will be success? It will be a successful project, because moving to a new deployment tool, as I mentioned, it's like cultural change. And second, there's a lot of distraction that can happen from like large scale migrations. So we started really small. We started with the pilot projects of around 10 services. And then got their initial feedback, and these 10 services included some of the most critical services in things like services which are in payments, for example. And once we got the feedback, we quickly iterated on the tooling. We added a bunch of features that we wanted, that customers wanted to start using Spinnaker. And this was like a big, like large diffs between our existing tooling and Spinnaker. One of the examples is if a particular deployment is bad, how can someone mark that particular deployment is bad in Spinnaker? There's no native functionality, so we had to build it ourselves. So that is one of the features that we added. And once we iterated on that feedback, we were able to prioritize set of features that is required for us to make it generally available in 2020. So in 2019, we onboarded a bunch of new additional services. And also help them onboard onto ACA, and that way I was able to in H2 we were able to come up with a value proposition that this is how Spinnaker really helps service teams to not only reduce their overall downtime because of these safety features that Spinnaker provides, and really helps them automate their release workflows. But also it increases their overall development velocity, which is critical for businesses in order to improve their overall time to market. And then in 2020, with all the feedback and all the iterations that we had, as I mentioned, we prioritized the appropriate set of feature set that will help that will improve the adoption probability across the company. And we GA'd the product in Q1 2020. From there until now, it has been received with very with very positive feedback that customers are able to reduce their overall downtime, and then improve their overall development velocity. And now they can focus more on their business requirements, and not more on the operational work. In this case, deployments. And second, they also get a lot more better experience on the troubleshooting piece when a particular deployment fails. Today we are after GA. Today we are at a place where majority of our services are on Spinnaker, and getting onto Spinnaker is a company-wide priority for Airbnb. And we are going to look into completely deprecating the old tool, which is Deployboard, sometime early next year. Great. So next step here is next thing here is, how did we come up with a successful onboarding strategy? And that is like a challenge for most internal products across various across any company, that we can come up with a new tool or a new product, and how do we make sure that this overall story of onboarding or adoption is successful within the company? So we looked at it from the customer perspective, like what are the top problems that customers may have, or frictions customers may have, and that will lead to unsuccessful adoption. So one of the key insight after interviewing a bunch of customers was that customers did not want to be forced into using a new tool. They really wanted a gradual move to the new tool. So we kept our existing tooling, which is Deployboard, or also really improved the Spinnaker story significantly, such that it was no-brainer for these service teams to move on to Spinnaker, because we had appropriate case studies, we had appropriate value proposition that other teams were receiving significant benefits from moving on to Spinnaker. So there's first one is like no forced migration. And second piece is, we really help customers to onboard pretty quickly by them automatically using self-onboarding mechanisms. So we provided default pipeline configs with default automated canary analysis, and that really help customers to get the pipeline from day one. As soon as they create the new services, they'll get these pipelines. At the same time, they can just create these pipelines with just a command line, with just like one line of command line command. And then third one is more of the reporting perspective, which is how can we enable customers to report the business impact, so that they can themselves share the success story of Spinnaker within their teams and within their partner teams. So we were able to share business impact with all the customers, that how Spinnaker really helped them improve their overall site uptime or service uptime, and then also help them understand how many potential incidents were prevented because of ACA, or because of this particular pipeline was able to catch regressions through these integrations, through the integration tests which were kicked off by this pipeline. Next, as I mentioned, we used one of the strategy was to enable users to quickly onboard, and we used a lot of defaults, starting from which environments should any service be in, to what pipeline how pipeline should be structured, and to which kind of integrations that particular pipeline should have, and what kind of canary analysis config a particular pipeline should have. So all of this was automated for our customers as a default, like a package, and they can just get it from day one. And of course, they can customize it for their service specific needs. But this really helped customers to get started with Spinnaker and see their service on Spinnaker UI, and then play with it and quickly get start customizing their service for Canary or for their particular pipeline. So where we are today? So today we have more than 450 services which are active on Spinnaker. By active, I mean these are services which are deploying at least once in a particular month, or yeah. And then second piece is the number of rollbacks or percentage of rollbacks which are prevented by Spinnaker. So around 75% of our rollbacks were prevented by Spinnaker since we GA'd. And then 65% of our critical services were deployed with Spinnaker, and they were validated with with an ACA stage, which is automated canary analysis and Spinnaker, which means that majority of our services are now using Spinnaker and are using deployment safety mechanisms such as ACA for their deployment safety needs. So with this in mind, today Airbnb is all in on Spinnaker investment, and we are going to significantly improve the continuous delivery story moving forward with the help of Spinnaker. Back to you, Jens.
So now that we have Spinnaker as a GA, we'd like to talk a little bit about some of the UI and user experience changes that we've made to Spinnaker. So when we initially started with Spinnaker, we wanted to run some user research to actually make sure that we were actually delivering a good product. And so we ran a few user research sessions. And what we found is that people were actually not very happy with the Spinnaker UI initially. Here are some quotes from some of the Airbnb engineers that that participated in our user research. So the quotes range from the UI is confusing. It's very hard to identify which builds are currently live. People not really understanding how CI and CD are integrated. And they were worried that it would make remediating incidents more difficult. The other concern that people had was that it was fairly hard to debug a pipeline failure. So the golden path worked pretty well, but once a pipeline fails, it could be pretty difficult to debug. And so it would be a very painful experience to figure out why their pipeline failed. Some things that we saw were, for example, cryptic error messages, especially when it comes to debugging automated canary analysis, which cannot always be very straightforward. So what we did is we extended Spinnaker's UI, and we really pushed for integrating our internal CI platform. So basically what we did, as you can see from the screenshot, is that we added a new top-level page to Spinnaker called Snapshots. And this snapshot page will basically show us all of the existing builds. And we also pull in information from Spinnaker itself. So from the snapshots page, we can not only see the builds that are currently running, but we can also see which environment these builds are deployed to. And we can actually start a new deployment from this view. So this new view is sort of the bridge between CI and CD. Obviously, we also wanted to make some improvements to the general Spinnaker UI. Some of those we would definitely be interested in open sourcing in 2021. But as you can see here, we made it more obvious with color coding which pipelines are actually deploying to production. So you can see the middle pipeline has this green production label. So it's very easy for users to pick up which pipeline is deploying to a production environment. We've also color-coded pipelines that are currently in progress, as well as pipelines that have failed. And some of the other changes that we've made is that we pulled the actions menu to the right side, and we've made it much more straightforward to roll back to an old build. One of the concerns that people had was that it was difficult to roll back to an old build. So we added some extra functionality there. And of course, we are integrated with our own CI system. So from this page, you can actually see which build is associated with each pipeline execution, and you can actually go from a pipeline to our CI system. And then the last thing we did to the UI is adding a deployment history view. So while we had the pipeline executions, what we found is that service owners could have multiple pipelines that deploy to the same environment. Let's say they had an emergency pipeline that deploys to production, but they can also have their more safe deployment, their safe default pipeline. And so what we wanted to do is wanted to give a different perspective to deployments. We wanted to basically make a cross-section of deployments by environment. So rather than looking at the deployments per pipeline, which the pipeline view offers, this new view actually allows people to sort of quickly show all of the production deployments or all of the canary deployments. So this gives us a lower level perspective of what's been deployed, and this allows us to debug complicated scenarios that could be caused by deployments across different pipelines. So this gives us a lower level overview of what actually happens. Obviously, this view will link back to the pipeline view. So think of the deployments as sort of child stages to the pipelines. So you can go from a pipeline to a deployment and the other way around. And then last but not least, we made some changes to the debugging experience. Some small changes, for example, we clearly show which stages failed, and then you can quickly go from your pipeline execution to the failed stage, and that should make it easier to find actually which stage is the culprit, especially if you have a complicated pipeline with 15, 20 stages. So these are the changes that we've made to the UI and the user experience of Spinnaker. We also just added some new features, features that did not exist in Spinnaker. And so we'd like to talk about some of the features that we've added. The first thing we did is we integrated our in-house integration testing frameworks. So Airbnb has a bunch of integration test frameworks, and we wanted to make sure that Spinnaker is compatible with those, and we can actually run those integration tests as stages in a Spinnaker pipeline. So what we did is we basically extended the Orca service, and we basically taught it to talk the Airbnb service IDL language. So that's basically the protocol that services at Airbnb use to communicate with each other. And now that Spinnaker can actually talk the Airbnb service language, we can actually create a stage that triggers an integration test. So we can easily integrate Spinnaker with our CI platform, with our old system deploy board, and we can do things like running fault injection tests. So by creating a simple stage that allows Spinnaker to talk to our in-house frameworks, we offer a lot of extensibility. And then another feature that we added is marking builds as bad. A scenario that we often see is that a build in CI is actually green, and then someone deploys it, and they end up deploying that build to Canary, and then something is caught in Canary. Canary isn't necessarily CI. It's part of the CD process, but you still want to make sure that that specific build does not get redeployed. So one thing we can actually do is we can mark a build as bad and leave a note. So the next time someone else tries to deploy that same build, they will actually get an error message. So not only can CI fail your build, but certain stages in the CD process can also fail your build, and we want to safeguard against accidentally deploying a build that has already failed in the past. And then the last thing we did is a lot of our customers adopted Spinnaker, but they weren't necessarily convinced that they were getting the value that we promised they would get, or they didn't necessarily have the right data. So one thing we did is we basically built a tool that automatically generates dashboards for every service that onboards to Spinnaker. And we basically give them all of the low-level information that we have access to. So for example, you're looking at a dashboard for one of our internal services, and you can actually see in the last month, Spinnaker detected 14 regressions, which stages got those regressions, when are your pipeline when are most pipelines executed, what's your deploy velocity, and sort of giving developers these metrics and these tools will actually allow them to also go to their upper level management and tell them like, hey, look, we've caught 14 regressions by adopting Spinnaker. This has been a worthwhile investment. And so giving people these metrics and that data is really useful because it allows us to clearly make the case that Spinnaker is an improvement compared to our old tools. And we also created Anchor. So managing many pipelines in the Spinnaker UI at Airbnb scale, 450 applications would have been very painful. So what we did is we basically created a pipelines as code YAML language. We have a tool called Anchor, which basically reads these YAML files and then generates the appropriate Spinnaker pipelines. This is a very extensible framework that's internal to Airbnb, so that people can also create internal Airbnb specific stages and then generate the appropriate configs for those stages. And Manish will clarify our future plans for 2021.
Great. Thanks, Jens. for going over those UI UX improvements and extension. I think those were one of the key reasons for us for Spinnaker to be successful at Airbnb, which are like a lot more feature gaps that we also intend to upstream a bunch of these changes to Spinnaker open source. That said, in moving forward, in in future, we're going to look into make sure that we always are in sync with the Spinnaker upgrades. In the past, we were more focused on the usability and making sure that there's adoption piece, and not more so on on keeping Spinnaker up to date with the open source versions. So we'll make sure we are looking into processes which will help us always keep the Spinnaker to the latest version. We'll continue to invest in this Spinnaker scalability and uptime as we are managing the Spinnaker infrastructure ourselves. We are and we move towards 100% adoption. The site availability of Spinnaker availability is of critical in nature because any service that needs to deploy now has a hard dependency on us. So we are going to invest into making sure that Spinnaker is always available and up, there's always a alternative way. There's always an alternative for customers to not be blocked for their deployments. So the future of deployments at Airbnb, we're looking at key areas, specifically two things: progressive delivery and continuous deployment. Progressive delivery is essentially enable customers to not only deploy their changes directly and limit the blast radius, but also use feature flags for really a large set of features that customers can directly use in their feature rollout strategy, and it really helps customers to just look at the impact of those features, and if there's if there is some problem with that particular feature rollout, they can just turn off the feature flag, and all of this can be orchestrated by Spinnaker. We are also going to look at enabling deployment strategies such as red, black, or blue, green, and that will help us improve the overall rollback time and experience. And then lastly, we are also going to possibly look at managed delivery. And this is managed delivery. Delivery is a concept that Netflix has proposed, which is focusing on customer requirements and not like the specific details of the pipeline. So we are going to investigate that and possibly move towards managed delivery aspect as well. So that's it from me and Jens. Thank you everyone for your time, and we hope we can continue this engagement and conversation next year as well. Jens.
Thank you.